Hello, you lot. Welcome. We are on again for the next hour live with that Capture One. So for those of you that are joining on Thursday, this is half of your weekly dose of me. So enjoy that. For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about on Thursday, we'll cover that in a minute. Don't worry. Right, a few things to get started. So number one, if you are here for the next hour to watch us collectively go through and edit your pictures through Capture One, that one, which is a piece of software written by the guys in Copenhagen, then you are in the right place. If you are here for any other purpose, we might disappoint, so sorry about that. You might want to flick over the channel. We're going to, as I say, spend the next hour editing your raw photos. So you, when you take a photo using a, let's call it proper camera, but even your phone cameras are now capable of doing raw content. All of that stuff receives data through a sensor. And that sensor is storing that as what we call raw information. And we use a processing piece of software like Capture One, that others are available, to take that raw data and produce, hopefully, a lovely version of your picture, which is more closely aligned to what you saw. Because unfortunately, when a camera receives raw data, it's not quite the same as how your brain interprets the same scene. Because we're not actually seeing raw data, we're seeing what our brain thinks our eyes have seen, which is sometimes jaded by past experience, by other images, by color tone, by all that sort of stuff. And we use this software to get your raw data, the actual colors and sensor readout, back to what you wanted, what you felt, what you saw, what you remembered. So next hour, as I say, we've got your pictures you sent in. We'll talk about that in a second as well. And we'll edit them up in a way that either fixes a problem that you've said and you've sent in with it, or we've done it in a slightly different way to what you had already, just to give you a different way of doing it. So, little bits of housekeeping, let's call it that. Number one, the version of Capture One that we are using today is 16.5.9. That hasn't changed for a few weeks. Yes. And are we due an upgrade soon? Probably. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But the version that we're on is the 16.5 branch. That means that if you have a perpetual license, you're entitled to anything that's 16.5 beyond if you bought into the 16.5 branch. If you have anything prior to that, you may need to upgrade to get into that 16.5 group. If you have a subscription, you should be on the latest version, unless there's a very good reason not to be. There are some, because that's what you've paid for. So why on earth wouldn't you be on the latest version if you're paying every month or every year to have that right? So it's not a case of it's a free update. That's what you're paying for. Please get your value. If you have no idea what version you're on or no idea what software I'm talking about, go to capture1.com, which isn't on this screen, but literally just join the words up, download a free trial. You can follow along. There we go. For those of you that are live, so actually, here's a fun one for you, because I don't think I've actually explained this. I can't see who is live, just to be very clear, because we're not looking at a live YouTube stream. The only time that I can see who is live is when you guys participate in the chat, which is why we do all the welcomey stuff beforehand. So if you want to engage with this session, please do make it interactive, question, heckle, challenge, request, whatever you want to do. It takes about 3 or 4 seconds for what I'm saying to hit your screen because of the way that streaming works. So there's a little bit of a delay. We can't really have a chat conversation, but please do make this as interactive as you want. If you're watching this in the future, I can't time travel. So unfortunately, we're kind of limited in how much we can talk to you, but you can use the commenty thing down there and ask questions, and we'll try and cover as many as we can. So first bit of admin done. There we go. Second bit of admin. Once you're on that version, if you want to send your files in, do it that way, there. So paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com, you will be able to upload your raw file or your edited file from Capture One. You can export what's called export originals. I'll show you that in a second. You can upload that with any questions or any queries or any worries or challenges or, can we have a look at requests, and we'll try and get them in. We'll try and get as many as we can into each section. Between now and the next time we're live, there's monthly competition on its 4th month. That's exciting. So if you want to be part of that, that's all contained in there on that Facebook group. If you search for my name, you'll probably hit that group. In there, you will find A, announcements of when next lives are, B, secret things like advance warning of masterclasses and stuff like that, and C, monthly competition. Join it. You might win something that's completely worthless and virtual. Right. Couple of other things then. So we said about new version potentially in the works. Who knows? Mystery. But there is a live stream of Capture One talking themselves about what their plans are for the future, development, changes, intentions in terms of tools and tool sets and workflows and all that sort of stuff. That's going to be coming live from an event on the 8th of May. I'm there in person, so you can message us and we'll try and get any questions answered. But more importantly, if you sign up, and I think it's sort of last chance to sign up for the stream, but you may well have had an email. If not, go to capture1.com. You'll find a little pop-up appears. Where's my Grover pointer? There we are. That pop-up appears on your screen, and you can sign up for that session, and it will give you, hopefully, some insight into the direction and trajectory, good word, that Capture One's heading in as far as software goes. So that's on the 8th of May. Before then, this Thursday, and I referred to it, Masterclass. So we did a lot of these over a year ago now, and we're going to restart them. So we've got 4 already planned over the next few months. The first one being this one. So midday, well, we're calling it Midday Magic, but basically high contrast scenes, and that might be quite topical given some of today's images that have been sent in. But how to get rid of that dead time. So in other words, photographers love, especially landscape guys, we love shooting in the morning, golden hour, evening, golden hour, sometimes even night, astro, woo. You notice they've got names, funky names, golden hour, astro, they sound exciting. Midday sun doesn't really cut it, does it? But actually you can get some epic photos in midday, and high contrast scenes and all the stuff that goes with weather and so on. So we'll cover all of that, and actually A, how to shoot those high contrast scenes, B, how to get the best out of your camera with it, and C, then how to edit it up to not lose anything and actually add in mood, add in tone, add in something that's less obvious than just a great big ball of fire illuminating everything evenly on the earth, which is typically how we see the sort of 8 to 10 hours every day in the middle. So that's on Thursday. If you are able to join it live, you'll find the link in this, down there somewhere, this video to join it and sign up. If you are not, you will still get a link if you signed up, and you can watch it at your own leisure, but you won't be able to join in. Life's about choices. So let's get, is that all of our announcements today? I think so. Let's go into Capture One. So first thing I said, we would explain how to get files into this session. So these are actually packaged EIP files from Fabrizio. So this is a version of a raw file combined with all the adjustments that Fabrizio's made so that I can see what was done and, where are we? What the original looked like. I won't merge those words. If I look at another picture we're going to look at shortly today, Billy, these are raw files, .arw. So if I want to send me just the raw file, drag that into a folder or find the folder itself on your computer and send it through that WeTransfer link. If you want to send with the adjustments, so we can have a look at what's already been done, make some changes, see if there are any improvements we can make, find the file, right click, export, and instead of going to export like we normally would, which would be to a TIFF, a JPEG, I don't know, do we still do bitmaps? That'd be fun. Go to export original files. You can also edit up here on the export box up the top left. There's also the export tab that you can do it in as well. But if you've just got one image that you want to focus on, right click, export original files. And then in that box, you just tick this little box that says export as EIP. That export as EIP basically combines all of the changes that you made, the layers, the masks, the everything, with the raw file into one little package that you send across, and then we can see everything. What that doesn't work on, unfortunately, is a DNG file. Exporting DNGs with their adjustments isn't yet possible. It should be soon, and there are ways of doing it. They're very messy. You can save out a session, or you can save out a catalog and whatever else. But to all intents and purposes, for most of your needs in terms of uploading and sending files across is literally that. Right click, export original files, and make sure you've ticked that one. When you do, it will force you to include adjustments. Why? Because if you're not going to include the adjustments, there was no point in sending the EIP. You just send the raw. So you've been looking at this picture long enough on the screen, and this is the after version, to have made a view in your own mind as to where we're going to go with this. Capture One's really good in terms of this feature, the before and after feature. Most of you in any editing software will be used to this. But we've got the ability to swipe. We've also got the ability to change this to say full view. So I can go after, before, after, before. And the before shot here, well, it's a little hot. Let's call it that. And what I mean by that is that contrast. So what I was talking about earlier, the Masterclass piece, the midday magic and contrast Masterclass, it's about exactly this sort of light. This light, I doubt it was actually full on midday. If I look at some of the shadows, you know, I know this. So this is low photo, and it's taken from a very famous bridge with 1 million photographers on it every morning, every evening. It is not a pleasant experience. I wouldn't describe it as that, but it is a very well-known iconic shot, or iconic postcard shot. Now, looking at this, funnily enough, I can see some of those photographers' shadows. Here, which tells me that the sun was actually relatively low. It wasn't completely low, but it was probably at sort of 30 degrees in the sky. Has my screen frozen? Yes, it has, David. Good shout. Never stream anything. Streaming stuff goes wrong. Let me just check. Did you see the export as EIP thing? I think you did. But if you didn't, we'll rerun it. But if you did, we'll carry on. But more importantly, this is what I'm talking about here. These little shadows, which you can now see without a frozen screen. That's exciting. So these ones here, you can see they're photographers. And actually, this is probably a quiet day, because on days that I've been on that bridge, there's not gaps in between them. I mean, you're talking tessellated tripods. It's not fun. But what this does tell me is the sun was not low, but it was, you know, it was maybe 20, 30 or 30 degrees up in the air. But what that means, especially in a snowy scene, is you've got a huge amount of reflected light coming straight back at you. So if you think about the way that light reflects, ironically with snow, in terms of pointing at a mountain face, if the light was directly above, you almost might get less direct reflection than the stuff that's behind you, because it's bouncing straight back at you from the mountain. Would a polarizer help? Not really, because light that's coming directly at you and reflecting directly at you, a polarizer doesn't really fix. It fixes incidental light, so it fixes light that's coming at different angles. So I'm not sure how useful a polarizer would have been in here, and especially, you know, if you're using a wide lens, polarizers can introduce some issues rather than helping with them. But my biggest concern with this shot, and funnily enough, it's the same shot or same issue I have with here. Tim's just said he didn't see the full view. So before and after up here, don't forget you can click on this little arrow and you can change it from being a split view like this to being a full screen view, which means when I click it, I get before and after completely. No need to have to swipe. So let's go back to my split view. Let's go back to the original. So this is what I'm going to classify as exposed to the right syndrome, ETTR. And exposed to the right is this wonderful little mantra which is bandied around by lots of people who have not been burned by it and like to talk technically rather than realistically. I'm not a fan of ETTR. I'm not a fan of it being the panacea to every single problem with your dynamic range in your camera. In theory, it goes like this. If I look at my histogram along here, in fact, let's pull up a Grover pointer. This will help. On my histogram, I have shadows and I have highlights. And these are the limits of my range, 0 down to 255, or up to 255. The quality of data, which comes from, in part, something called signal to noise ratio, but it's basically the quality of your data up here is better, generally speaking, than the quality of your data down here. So you don't really want to be pushing all of your images, your exposures, down to the bottom. If you do that, when you try and lift them up, you might find noise comes in, you might find some of those shadows have got artifacts in them, some color noise, some stuff basically that we don't want to bring up to the viewer. Recovering from up here down, in theory, gives us a cleaner recovery. There's less noise. It's up in the high end of the histogram. A lot less noise, and it's cleaner as we put it down. So in other words, if I can recover those tones, then it's a lot better for me than trying to recover a shadow. But here's the problem. If I recover a shadow, it may include some noise, but there is still detail in there. Something that's below 0. So the true dynamic range on your camera is not quite the 0 to 255. Imagine there's a ghost element to the left and to the right of your histogram that you're seeing. So you can pull in some extra stuff that's below 0 in theory. You can pull in some extra stuff that's above 255 in theory. But if a shadow is underexposed, you will find there is still data in there. You can still pull it up. If a highlight is overexposed, and yes, Tim's made the point that the red channel looks blown out. It is, so it's off the wall, as we'd call it. There is no data in that red channel now. It is blown. I cannot pull data back. I may be able to make it darker. I may be able to make it grayer. But if something is blown in a highlight beyond, way beyond 255, there is nothing for me to recover. So if you are not hot on your camera and you do not know exactly what it's doing, don't play with ETTR. Don't follow the big mouth boys. Learn your camera. Learn what it's capable of. Learn its dynamic range and play in your own safe zone. There is another little tab in Capture One that we don't really touch on in this session because it's typically around tethering. But if you go to your tether tab in Capture One, you'll find this exposure evaluation. And what's interesting here is this gives you effectively the average exposure of the shot. Now, if you think about it, in a perfect world, you'd have an exposure that's averaging of 0. So in the case where you're pushing it above 0, that's fine if you've got some specular highlights or you've got some twinkles or something like that that's lifting it up. But if I'm seeing a consistent shift to the right and I'm seeing an output here, which is way, way blown, you've pushed it too far. It's that simple. Can we recover it? Possibly. Should we recover it? Well, I'd take it again. This graph is actually very, very handy. And I'm actually going to add it in here for the purpose of this session. So you can remember, you can always add in any tool within Capture One in any single tab that you want. So I'm going to add in that exposure evaluation into our editing tab. Now, what's interesting with this tool, this is the before shot, right? This is the after shot. Now you'll see the histogram changes. So if I pull the exposure down completely, you see my histogram changes. This is my output histogram. The exposure evaluation doesn't change. That's fixed. That's based on what I shot with the camera. So it's actually a really good baseline. And if I look at it into this tool as well, if I look at our different curves, this is one where where our ICC curve, and we talk about this quite a lot. You'll have seen it last week and we'll go through it again today for obvious reasons. Auto is normally film standard. It's one and the same thing for most cameras. If you've got a recipe built on or a Fuji camera or a Nikon camera, it will load in the profile or recipe that you had, or film simulation that you'd chosen in the camera as auto, but you still have access to film standard, which is the baseline for Capture One. It's a bit of a curve in film standard. If you switch to linear response, it's a flatter curve. It doesn't let the highlights go quite so peaky. It doesn't let the shadows go quite so deep. And you'll see on your exposure evaluation, it does reflect the curve that you've loaded in. So you can see in this case, yes, we can recover some of those highlights-ish. We'll talk about it. Okay. So let's look at the image overall. And what I'm going to do before I make any messy changes, I'm going to reset that exposure change. So you get the idea. Our histogram, this is the output histogram. Our exposure evaluation is what the camera has following the ICC curve that we apply. Right. Let's then reset our exposure. So this is the before. This is Fabrizio's after. And I'm going to create a clone of this variant. So I've got all of Fabrizio's edits, but in one that I cannot hurt. Paul, I don't know if it was Paul last time. Can we edit in Lightroom? Can I personally edit in Lightroom? Yes. Can lots of people edit in Lightroom? Yes. Is this particular thing called editing in Lightroom? No. So we're not going to today. I'm probably not going to for quite a while. But if you want to learn to capture one, welcome. So yes, Tony, exposure evaluation, what a useful tool. It is. However, the use in it is getting your eye trained to what does my camera's exposure meter tell me? The plus a third, plus a half, plus a full stop, minus whatever. And what do I actually get on my screen? I've got to be able mentally to know my camera well enough to know how far I can push it. And the answer, Fabrizio, in terms of your camera is not this far. This is too far because you've got stuff that's blown out. And if I were to reset this, actually, I'm just going to reset all of the edits by creating a new variant. So here is our out of camera. Turn on my exposure warning. Wow, that's kind of hot. Not in a good way. So what can we do? Well, immediately, regardless of anything, if I see a histogram that is peaky like this, and what I mean by that is we've got a real challenge in dynamic range. You've got some shadows in there, but you've also got some peaky highlights and not much in the middle. Well, one way we can manage it is by changing that curve to be linear response. And look, immediately we've recovered a lot of the stuff that's blown. You can see in that exposure evaluation, it's already reduced the amount of blown area up here. And actually, it's shifted that exposure from being positive up here to being negative down here. And this is what I mean by you need to know your camera, because it may be that Fabrizio's camera was more aligned to linear response. So the camera may have been saying you're slightly underexposed. But then when you pull it into Capture One, it applies that film standard curve, it's over. So that's why it's not, there's no technical answer in this. You've got to know your kit. And it's why I really worry when people talk about, oh, you should expose to the right. You should when you know your kit. If you don't know your kit, don't play that game. It's too risky. You're going to lose the shot. Soapboxy. So let's go into this edit. And the key thing here is these bits are still overexposed in theory. Now, just to be clear, an exposure warning means one or more channels of red, green, or blue are overexposed. In this case, look at the readout at the top as I move my mouse around. It's the roof and it's the red channel that's overexposed. There is still green data, there's still blue data, there's still luminosity there. It's 243, it's not quite overexposed, which is why you can see detail in the roof. But that red channel for sure is overexposed. Here is definitely overexposed. Here, both red and green are overexposed, blue not being. So what can we do to try and pull it back? Well, let's just test. Can we pull any of that back? And we kind of can, but we're not getting any more detail. So this is what I was saying about earlier. In the case of an overexposed highlight, don't kid yourself. If you've brought the exposure down and you think, oh, I fixed it, because look at what's happened. My exposure warnings have all gone. Great, perfect. Well, they may have done, but I haven't got any more detail in those areas. It's just flat. We're just changing the brightness of those flat areas. That's not a fix. So the fix is about getting that exposure right in the camera. And this area here is just flat white. Now, the irony in this case, that is actually flat white rendering. So it's not the end of the world in this shot. But if we wanted to capture the detail and the texture on that wall or something like that, you needed to have protected those highlights. And it's why I worry about ETTR in general. So yeah, Paula. Yeah, if you're shooting in black and white, you need to protect highlights. That's not even an option. You have to be on that page. Right. Let's go back to Fabrizio's edit. So, talking about something we talked about last week, which was linear response versus auto. There is nothing stopping you starting from auto and recovering the highlights. You can get to where linear response started from, but it's just potentially a lot more work. So let's just prove that point. This curve is auto, which is the same as film standard for those of you that want to be particular. I could pull back. Let's turn on the exposure warning. Let's pull back white. And let's pull back highlight. Okay. I've got close to where linear response was. And funnily enough, we've now got that nice warm morning soft light, right? Golden hour light. And if I look at here to here, this one feels, sorry, let me just get rid of Paula's comment, useful though it was, Paula. This feels a lot more warm, a lot more welcoming, right? Now, if we think this just fits or feels a little bit too flat, not quite as punchy as we'd like, we can pull up brightness. Now, brightness doesn't, look at this, I'm not necessarily affecting my exposure too much with brightness. If I use contrast, I will. But brightness is a very, very forgiving, sympathetic tool. Instead of sliding our values literally and translating them, transposing them, so what was 250 is now 260, oops, that's overexposed. And what was 128 is now 138, that's okay. What brightness does is it shifts basically the mid-cluster. It pushes that middle bit and it squeezes it up towards the top wall, that 255 area. Likewise, if you pull brightness down, it's going to squeeze the shadows. It's not going to push them off of the end. It's not going to push them beyond zero. It's just going to darken the midtones of the image. So think about brightness as a way of changing your midtones, similar to what you can do with levels, but it's just a bit more ramped. It's a bit more user-friendly. Let's call it that. So with that, let's just pull up our brightness. I've left my exposure warning on to give me a bit of a hint, so just in case I push it too far. You're always going to get some little specular highlights in a place like this where you're just bouncing back direct sunlight, especially onto white. But what we're going to do is we're going to do our brightness slider up until a point, not like this, because also remember, where it's lifting up and it's squashing all of that midtone data to be brighter, it's flattening the contrast in the image, and we want to keep contrast in the image. So I'm going to lift it by about that, not much more. In fact, even that is too much. I'm going to go there. Okay. Now, what about this dark part here? Well, here's an unusual one. Normally, we use the HDR sliders to recover everything. Now, all of this stuff here fits in the sort of lower mid-tones to dark areas, so shadowy. I want more contrast in the scene. But if I use the contrast slider, that's going to be pushing the highlights up as well as the shadows down. I just want to reduce the shadows. So I'm not going to use contrast because that's going to do the opposite of what I've just done to recover this. What we're going to use is the shadow slider in high dynamic range, and I'm going to darken them. So I've now got a high contrast image. Let me turn that warning off. Without the amount of blown highlights, with some texture, with some shadows, with some highlights in there. Look at that peak here. What we've done is we've basically recovered this challenge and we've pushed the data back to within that nice visible range of 0 to 255. More importantly, nice printable range, 0 to 255. We want to print things, we want to put them on a wall. And if I now look at before and after, there's our original, there's our recovery, and that's looking pretty good. If I want it to get a bit brighter up there, I could reduce our highlight reduction a little bit, could reduce our white reduction if I'm willing to let things go a little bit hot. So, a few more exposure warnings, that's okay. But that gives me something that's so much more detailed, so much more credible, so much more content worthy, or it's full of actual content rather than looking at it and thinking, oh, my eyes are bleeding. That's one where, yeah, for sure, you can do a lot with this. But you've got to know your camera. You've got to know these exposures before you start shooting like this. Jeff, out of curiosity, why do you use the HDR sliders instead of the curve, which is much more precise? Because we don't need to be precise, Jeff, is the answer. And I worry with it. This is the one where I struggle, because what a lot of people are looking for in Capture One is what's the right answer, what's the best answer. And the answer is there isn't one. So technically, you should expose to the right. Great. Risk of going wrong? Pretty high. When it goes wrong? Screwed. Technically, I can do everything I've just done in the HDR sliders in the curve. And it is more precise, that's correct. But that precision comes at a cost, which is I can also screw it up. What a lot of Capture One's tools do, believe it or not, just actually, let's go back one. Most of Capture One's tools, if you didn't realize it, all they're doing is they're changing effectively white balance and tint. They're changing color values and they're changing the curve. They're exposing them in different ways. So for instance, brightness is a little bit like, we go to the Luma range, let me just create a new layer. If I wanted to do brightness with a curve, I'm just going to lift the midtones up. And I would anchor the top and the bottom. See, remember when I said about doing a ramp? Well, it's kind of like that. It's a lift of the midtones. If I want to put brightness down, I would just pull the curve down like this. You notice it's not pushing anything to be overexposed or underexposed. It's a curve adjustment. But the guys have already done that for you. They've introduced a tool called brightness. So use it. In terms of recovering shadows, recovering highlights, well, yeah, of course, we can do that in the curve. We can do that in levels. But funnily enough, the guys already thought about that for you, and they've launched highlights, shadows, white, black. So why wouldn't I use a tool that's been purpose-built to do that? So don't make your own life more difficult than it needs to be. If the tool doesn't do what you need, then for sure, go back to the manual. The curve is the equivalent of your manual setting on your camera. I'm a big advocate. If I'm shooting a concert, I'm not shooting that thing on manual. No way. I'm going to fix probably the shutter speed and let it play with its ISO and it play with its aperture because it's able to do it quicker and better than I can in that heat of the moment. You're paying for your camera to have certain modes. You should use them if they're the right tool and the right mode at the time. You're paying for Capture One to have all these tools. If you just want a curve editor, oh, save yourself all the hassle. Go back to Capture One version 4. It had a curve. Just use that. But what they've done is they've made your life so much easier by exposing all these different ways of editing individual channels, individual curves, individual whatever, white balances, whatever, without needing to go into the technical depths of it. So yeah, to Jed's point, couldn't you just use a curve to increase bento brightness? Yeah, you can, but I've got a slider that says brightness. Let's use that. So in my head, and this is one where this isn't about whether you've progressed to professional level. What you'll find is actually most of the proper high-end pros are using the tools that are best made available to them for a job because it's easier, because it's quicker, because it does the job. They're not sat intricately generating individual curves for every single photograph that's on their screen. They're just not doing it because you don't need to. So this here is one of the most powerful ways of pulling back the detail that may be on the edge or on the verge of lose or being lost. In this case, there is detail that's lost. It has been pushed too far, but we can recover it. We absolutely can recover it. There's one question. Where was it? I can't remember where it was. It was one of you just put a question up about linear response. We'll try and cover it later. But anyway, right. So there's a recovered version, to my mind, of Fabrizio's shot. So that being the original, ouch. This being Fabrizio's recovery, pretty good. That being my recovery, which is a different approach, which is use linear response as a curve, or use your auto curve or film standard and recover. But recover doesn't mean pull back all the highlights, pull up all the shadows. You get a flat image, no detail, boring. Instead, it means using these tools to their best extent. In other realms on here, so we've got a sky layer on there, which has got a little bit of a brightness recovery, bit of a highlight recovery. I would actually be in a place of punching a little bit of saturation into that sky, personally. You've got a mountain layer, which is lifting saturation on the mountain. I think that was the only thing that's done in there. Oh, there's a bit of clarity on the mountain. Yeah, fair enough. And then a sea layer with some clarity in the sea. Personally, I'd actually knock that clarity back. I want less focus on the sea, not more. So I'd be in a place of negative clarity and maybe even some negative structure. Because what I would then do, oh, you've got a village layer here, sorry. There's clarity on the village, that makes sense. Be careful with clarity on overexposed highlights because it's going to push them even more. So just, this isn't enough really to cause a massive problem, but do be aware of that. That clarity is yet another contrast adjustment, so be really careful with it. And there's a brightness pull down, and there's an exposure pull down, and there's a highlight correction in there, so fair play. What I would then do is go up to here, create a new foreground grad. and I would be putting in an exposure reduction there just to push the eyes up into the village. And actually, my gut feel is this is just a little bit too tight on that mountain. I want some more breathing room, I think. And it's tough because of this rotation correction on here. But how to do that? I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to go to my my lens adjustments, and within here on our keystone, so this has already been rotated by nearly 1 degree. I'm going to change the aspect of this photograph to be a little bit taller. You'll see why in a second. And then I'm going to pull this up here. So I'm squishing it a little bit. I'm making sure that the aspect of these houses isn't off. But I just want it to feel like there's less foreground. So here we've got a lot of foreground and this then feels squished. Here I've got less foreground, so it feels less squished. And what it does also mean is that foreground grad I'm going to move up to here, pull into there. I'm going to put on a sky grad, and that sky grad is going to come as a little bit of a diagonal. Pull down our exposure a touch, pull up our contrast, up saturation. Let's pull that down a little bit there as well. Okay, so that's where I get to. And I would be in a place of, if I look at this to this, it's the same shot, ostensibly. It's the same shot. This is a full recovery of that shot using linear response and fixing the exposure. This, I think, is probably the slightly better way of doing it. This is just too hot. And if we don't like the amount of yellow in here, remember, you can go back to your image layer and go to your color editor, and we can pick on this color here, which is in the, well, it's orangey yellow, and I can pull down that saturation a touch. So remember, I can still make it cooler. I can still make it feel Arctic without necessarily having to increase or brighten those yellows to be so that they're white. But overall, and the key fundamental thing in here is don't put yourself in a place where the first thing you've got to do in your image is fix it, is recover it. Because it's not fun then. You're not being able to make artistic decisions. You're making structural decisions on how to get the data back. And that is too hot. It's that simple. Strangely, similar tale on this one. So the original, a little bit too hot. Not so bad. It's not so much. But, you know, the first thing I'd be doing, Fabrizio, on this one would be into my HDR tool. You've got a base adjustments in here. You've got a highlight recovery. I'd be pushing that a lot further. So I'm going to pull that. I'm going to pull the whites in like that. You've got a village layer on here, but that also includes the sea, weirdly, which has got a saturation boost. And I think, yeah, there's a clarity boost in there. I would be in a place of maybe putting in a whole separate layer called clarity. And with that layer, using a soft brush, low flow, soft brush, I'm going to put my clarity nice and high. And I'm going to paint in clarity over the mountains. And if you want to look at the mask that I'm drawing, you see it's very rough because I don't care because it's clarity. It's just adding in contrast, micro contrast at that, mid-tones effectively. And that looks like a really, really subtle change until I turn it off. And you see you start getting some gravity and some depth into it, which is great. The sky, given we've got a storm going on, why isn't that more menacing? So let's add a menacing sky. Let's try the AI brush, see if it can get it. Yeah, pretty much. Going back to last week, I want to soften the edges of that, so I'm going to refine it and go all the way up. And with that refined mask, clouds are great for clarity. Use it. So I go from there to there in, let's be honest, a couple of clicks. If I want to brighten the sky, remember I still can. It doesn't need all that recovery, so I could pull that brightness up a little bit, but I could also pull down a little bit of shadow HDR. So you can get the idea. You know, what we're doing here primarily is trying to make sure that we don't have anything that's overexposed. So you are always going to get in these scenarios, like I say, that boat there, You've got some channels which are a little bit clipped. That's fine. But if I go back to the original and look at our exposure warnings, they're significantly more, and it's because it's just been exposed too much. Oh, Gary, good point. Deep sky. Yeah, so we haven't touched on this for a while. Style brushes. Built into Capture One, you have style brushes, and one of them is called Enhancements Deep Sky. And I'm going to reduce the hardness. When I start painting with Deep Sky, it's going to create me a new layer. And I can change this layer. Now I've started and created that layer, I could change it to an AI mask if I wanted to. But let's just go for that and just see what we get out of it. Yeah, a bit more menacing still. It's probably a bit overdone, a bit too much. So again, use the opacity slider on the layer, because Deep Sky is doing lots of things. It's changing lots and lots of sliders. Again, notice, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's not changing a curve in this case. It's using Capture One's own sliders, which do change the curve. But yeah, just be aware. They've exposed them for a reason. But yeah, Deep Sky, Gary, good idea, good shout. It does do the work, and especially in stormy stuff, it really does pull out detail. Let me just go into here. Without the Deep Sky, you're there, and that's with clarity, remember, as well, because we added clarity on. So we go from there, clarity added, the Deep Sky there. See a lot more detail and texture. In your normal workflow, do you not use the exposure warning when you adjust highlights? Not always. So I do-ish. The reason is because I'm making sure that my highlights aren't overexposed in the first place. That's the key answer to it. Don't blow your highlights. If you don't, then you don't have to worry too much about your exposure warning. If you're going to start lifting stuff, and if you're going to start pushing things towards that 255 wall, then yes, I would turn on exposure warning as you start to creep things up so you're not forcing anything to clip. But if you're starting off from a solid base, generally speaking, you don't have to worry too much about that exposure warning. What I would personally do, load up the raw, and I mean literally the raw, check your exposure warning. That tells me where I'm starting from. Do I have shadows that are underexposed? Do I have highlights that are overexposed? One way or the other, I know at least where my base is. But to be honest, your exposure evaluation and your histogram, they're telling you that anyway from the very beginning. So, maybe adding in exposure evaluation is not a bad idea for some people. It might help you to, and actually where it will help you genuinely, if you're struggling to get your head around, or the idea of where does my camera place highlights, when my camera says +1, what does that really mean overall in terms of metering? And that will maybe adjust some of your decision making when it comes to shooting, which makes your decision making when it comes to editing so much easier, honestly. Right, Billy. So this was sent in a little while ago, but I think Billy was away. So let's have a little play with this. This is an HDR question. So what Billy was saying was, the scene was 16 to 17 stops worth of dynamic range. Therefore, I've used HDR, and not in a way of trying to upset Billy, but I'm going to say you didn't need to, mate. And the reason is, I don't think it is 16, 17 stops worth of dynamic range in there, because if I look at, so these are the individual components. This one, exposed for shadows, this one exposed for highlights, and this one, which is our base. So this one exposed for highlights. Let's turn on my exposure warning. There are no highlight warnings, great, but there are also no shadow warnings. In order to get something below 0, I'd have to expose it another, what, -1.5 stops to even see little shadow warnings. -4 stops, now I see some shadow warnings, but no, nowhere near. The one for the highlights. Yes, we do. Oh, sorry, the one for the shadows. Yes, the highlights are blown out. But they didn't need to be, and my shadows still aren't dark. They're still not below 0. As I'm moving my mouse along here, look, I'm still getting 10, 11, 12, whatever. In an HDR world, yes, you will get the irony. We'll talk about this in a second. In an HDR blend, which is basically, let's get all three, the base, the shadow, and the highlights, right-click and go to Merge to HDR, and we get a couple of options, and it spits out a DNG file, which would be this one. But here's the irony. This mid shot here, has no highlight exposure warnings, has no shadow exposure warnings. Our exposure evaluation here is pretty much a perfect histogram. It's stretched right from the bottom right to the top. This was not a 16-17 stop scene at all. This is with the auto curve. If I change that to linear response, it bunches up even more. So let's leave it with film standard on there. The irony is, by trying to create an HDR, which in theory, let's think back to what I was saying earlier about the exposure to the right, the stuff in the shadows has a bit of noise in it. So if you take the shadow tone from an exposure that was brighter, designed for shadows, then in theory, in this DNG, we've got a cleaner set of shadows when we lift them up. But what you're also introducing is the risk of movement, the risk of these branches being slightly different, and actually they're a bit more blurred because it's tried to blend the dark branches with the background, and the leaves or the sticks, twigs have moved a little bit. And the ultimate irony, the HDR version has got an overexposed area in the sky. So don't do that. You don't need to. This was not a tricky scene. And this is where, again, use your metering, use your histogram. When you load it in, look at what the histogram is telling you before you start making decisions about pushing it one way or the other, or even HDR. And on this one, if you want the detail in this person's sweater or sweatshirt or whatever, and this mountain range up here, well, that's pretty easy. We're going to pull down our highlights, got a mountain range back. I'm going to pull up maybe black, which is kind of the sweater there, tiny amount there. Might want to pull up shadows a little bit. I've got the same scene as here, but I'd say it's better, cleaner. What's not good on this scene is this wonkiness. And I would hazard a guess. I think there are two things going on here. Number one, I'm not convinced this is straight. I get that there is if you're looking at a lake and the lake is coming towards you, you do get this sort of, whatever, it's not quite parallax, but you do get an effect of perspective that brings things and it looks like it's leaning down. But I'm not sold on the fact that that's completely what's going on here. There's a bit of that, but I also think it's slightly leaning. So if I were to rotate it, and this is where there is a problem, to fix that, this feels a little bit off. So it's not just going to work with purely a rotation. I'm going to do it with a keystone. So I'm going to go to my horizontal keystone, and I'm going to say leave this bottom bit where it is, but the top part I'd like you to stretch a little bit, like that. And that actually doesn't look too bad. I might want to pull out here a little bit. Yeah. But that feels a little bit better. Now, whether it is completely, I don't know, whether we need to now do a little bit more rotation. And the problem is, even if that was correct in theory, in practice when out there, when it comes to looking at it as a print, that's the first thing my eye goes to. It says this is wonky. It may not be wonky. Maybe this is a very odd lake that has an extreme pull down towards this left-hand corner, and that's what's causing that effect. But to the viewer that's not there at the time, this just looks a bit odd. As a print, this feels better. Now, we might need to do some extending of canvas and stuff like that. We might want to do some aspect stuff like I did before, just to get a little bit more breathing room. So we might want to, let's just go to, it's a tiny amount, but maybe there. I might want to even allow it to go outside the canvas in terms of the crop. So I can do that in our crop area here and say crop outside of image. I might then want to take it into something like a pixel editor to allow me to add in some of the extra missing bits in that top corner. But if my goal here was to correct any overexposure or underexposure, I didn't need HDR to do that. And anything that's moving, HDR is going to be a challenge. It always will be. Anything that's not still life, because individual frames, and the same with focus stacking, individual frames are going to have different content, different shapes, and different challenges. So, from here, there's not much really we do with it, is there? We might want to pull down these mountains. We want to make them a little bit more crispy, I guess. So let's create a new graduated filter. Let's just go to maybe there. have it fall off by the time it gets to the water. And then with that graduated filter, I can use a clarity slider to boost those mountains. I might want to pull our exposure down a touch. Yeah. And then maybe, I don't know, overall in the, let's go to my AI brush, create a new thing over the watery area. Don't like how that's missing a lot of it, but I basically only want to touch the water and the bit behind the tree. So let me now refine that mask, get a nice softer edge on it. Good. And with that, I'm going to pick on our color editor, call this blues. Don't need to be advanced. Again, going back to that same point earlier, if you don't need to use the advanced color editor, you don't have to. I'm going to pull that saturation up and I'm going to pull the lightness down. So we just get into more of a, it goes from being quite faded and bright to being a bit more deep blue. But if that's the HDR image, and we've got overexposed highlights, and the point was to get the whole thing exposed correctly, I'm going to go with that version, please. And we actually do have now, funnily enough here, some extra room. So again, what can we do? Well, we could push our exposure a little bit. Let's just go to there. We could push brightness up a little bit. Remember that brightness reduces our contrast. So if we're going to do that, we might want to not pull up the shadows by quite as much. But what I would say is, when it comes to printing, this probably feels about the right sort of level. The irony of pulling up all the detail on the sweater, we need our little healing brush tool, and we're going to need to heal all the bits of fluff. I'm not going to do that for you, Billy. that's on you. But yeah, if that was still in the shadow, that would have been quite handy, wouldn't it? Yeah, you don't see it. Anyway, but that's, and genuinely, it comes back to the same thing time and time again. Use the best tool for the scene that's in front of you and the edit that you've got. And in this case, I'm not convinced that HDR is the correct tool. Michael, odd reflection in the right-hand water. I don't disagree. It is odd, but it is coming from the mountains. It is, what's happening, I think, is this water here is slightly rougher. This water here is slightly smoother. So you're getting more of a contrasting reflection up here. If we want to fix that, let's give it a try. Reflection. Oops. Now, whether we should fix it, that's a different issue. But if we do want to fix it, let's just create a very rough mask there. I'm going to refine it to soften it. And with that mask, I'm going to pull down. So think about what we want to do. We want to get rid of contrast and get rid of detail. I'm going to pull the contrast, the clarity down. I might even add a bit of haze. So I'm going to pick the water tone, and that will kind of smooth that out a little bit. And then I might pull overall contrast down a little bit too. So it's only going to be subtle. It's not going to fix the world, but it goes from that to that, which just takes the edge off it, hopefully. So hopefully, Michael, that answers that one a little bit. It's not perfect, but depends. Some people would want the reflection, but that's where I would get to. I wouldn't be playing with HDR in this shot because your raws didn't need it. And that's the thing. Again, it's about reading what your raws are telling you. None of these histograms are telling you that you need to go beyond the realm of what your camera's dynamic range is, which is probably 12 or 13 stops. There's plenty in this scene. We've got time finally for Tim. So, fun one. When you send an EIP in, we get to see all your different variants, and Tim sent in quite a few different variants, and I get why. There's the original shot. The question on this one was about the keystoning and how to get it nailed. The keystoning isn't wrong, Tim. I think actually your keystoning is pretty much spot on. Let's just clone that variant. So if I were to look at, let's just load up a guide. The guidelines are in red. So if I move my guide across to this window line, this is correct. If I move it across this balcony line, They're not quite correct, actually. It does fall off up there, which is interesting, which would mean, so I'm going to guess up here they are correct. Yeah, and then down here they start falling off a bit more. Yeah, so your lower keystone is not quite right. If I go to the four-way keystone, basically what it needs is just a tiny touch up like that, and that will fix that up. So my line of windows is correct there. Now my line of balconies is correct at the bottom and correct at the top. But if I'm honest, the problem isn't that. The problem is visually, this is just a nightmare. And not photographically. Look at the window options here. Because each of the windows is different, you don't actually get any mental or satisfaction of seeing the same pattern repeat and repeat and repeat. So if I look at these here on this right hand side, you've got two split in twos, a 1-2-1, 1-1-1-1 again, and then another 1-2-1. We're not getting quite the neatness that you'd want for your brain to be satisfied and reassured that everything is straight. Then let's add in a diagonal cut along here. Then let's add in something in the background, which is going away not only diagonally that way, but also diagonally away from you. And then this bit down here. Now, here's the fun bit. Tim, I felt it had to fight both keystone and lens distortion. Yeah, once you get it right in one place, it goes wrong in another. I agree, but I don't think it's actually the tool in this case. I actually think it's just too complicated a scene. And what would have helped you, I think, and I don't know because we don't have it as content, but what would have maybe helped, if I look at our crop here, you were so tight down here to this water. If this had had more space in the foreground that was frankly calming and clearly level, it's water, clearly on the same plane, the boats are all there lined up, and it had a contrast to the chaos above it, I think this would feel a lot less messy, frankly. There's nothing particularly wrong with this. The keystoning works. There's nothing wrong with that respect. It's just there's nothing that my eye can really anchor on because everything is doing something completely different. I need something bigger, something a bigger margin. When we say things like give that mountain a bit of headroom, here you needed a bit more foreground room just to give a contrast between calm and straight and flat, and then chaos behind. Without that, you've kind of got chaos up here, and I don't really get the context of the boats. That's the problem. Because there's just so much going on, and it's great. Don't get me wrong, this building is very cool. It's great, but there's just too much going on in my head. I'm not sure about this toning. I actually prefer the toning you did, I think, here. The slightly less yellowy tone, so I personally would maybe pull down to there and maybe pull saturation a bit more, go even colder. But that's genuinely personal preference. I think actually you've just replied. Well done, Tim. I see what you mean about the windows and edges. I would be tempted. I don't know the place. I don't know the context of it, but I'd be tempted just to, if you can, go a bit wider. You're on a 70mm lens there, so you've got a lot of scope to come back. Get yourself a bigger margin down here and make this scene about the contrast. Make it the contrast between serenity and calmness and peacefulness in the foreground, level, water, horizons, all those lovely straight line words, versus the chaos behind, rather than just filling the scene with chaos. Paula, still don't know why you couldn't pack a DNG file into an EIP. I agree, it's just annoying. So if I try and make changes to a panorama within Capture One, the DNG that comes out, if you try and pack that as an EIP, it will fail to do that. The way that we get around it, we talked about it a couple of sessions ago, you can create a catalog with that file in. You can make all your changes, you can give someone the catalog or the session in that sense. But as an actual DNG to export the original with the alterations and adjustments, unfortunately, Capture One at the moment doesn't quite work it out. So maybe in the future. I genuinely don't know on that one. It is something that's annoying. It annoys me, especially with panoramas. but at the moment you just can't do it. Yeah, so just to be clear, Paul, I'm not talking about the DNGs that come from the RAW of the camera. We're talking about the DNGs. I know you mean DNG, not dog. We're talking about the DNGs that Capture One generates. So when Capture One makes an HDR DNG or Capture One makes a panorama DNG, it's that DNG that you can't output as an original with adjustments. So today, this one, Tim, go and reshoot it. Send it in after you've done a wider one. Let's have a look at it. Because I think it's an interesting scene. It's just so much going on. It's a really tight frame at the moment. It gives me a bit of a headache. This one here, Billy, honestly, the HDR thing, I think you're creating more work for yourself because ironically, it's creating exposure problems on an HDR thing, which is designed to get rid of exposure problems. And actually, out of the camera, this camera has captured it well enough for you to do it in a single frame. And Fabrizio, this is a perfect example, funnily enough, of challenging contrast situations. But this ETTR mantra, can we please get over it? I'm going to start referring to it like selective color in the 90s. It was cool once, but now I see so many issues where people have pushed it too far. And if I underexpose, yes, I may not get the purest quality of content in my shadows, but I still have content there. If I overexpose, game over. And if you don't know your kit to the nth degree in that exact scenario, in that particular lighting, and exactly what the meter's telling you, that's the risk you've got all the time. So be careful with it. And if you want to cover more of that, that's what that's about in part, because shooting in the midday unfortunately presents lots of these situations, especially with skies and snow and highlights and reflections and all the other stuff. So that's it for today. Well done, people. Good pictures. And as the point I was saying earlier, we can get them all back. There's no issue. It's just to where do you want to put your work? And I'd say putting it creatively is probably the better bet than putting it into fixing stuff. So that's it for this time. For those of you that are around on Thursday, we'll see you then, a couple of days' time. For those of you that want to look at other ones, other masterclasses, you'll find the link down below as well that covers all of that. And I think that's kind of it. We will announce the next live editing session on the website, which you will find there. But between now and then, look after yourselves, and we'll see you later. Cheers. Bye.